241. Avada's Pry Door. It's done? As the white light faded and the new entrance settled into place, someone muttered, "Isn't this a little?" "Don't celebrate yet," Percy warned. "We need to make sure it can't close again. Remember what happened the day before yesterday." At Percy's words, everyone tensed. They drew their wands and swept them over the archway, inspecting every inch. Avada joined them, but a slight smile tugged at his lips. He had known from the moment he cast his magic how this would end. After a thorough check, the 7 of them in the rock cave confirmed that the gate had been completely and permanently opened. It would not seal itself again. Finally, we did it. When the news sank in, one person slid down the wall and collapsed to the floor. Even Percy, usually all sternness, visibly relaxed. No wonder, the past 5 days had been crushing. Dumbledore had estimated a week to overcome Voldemort's first defense, and even that had taken Avada's special abilities into account. Clearly, he had still underestimated Avada's present strength, especially with his attention split by matters at Norberich University. For the first 2 days, everyone stayed in their tents, absorbing the knowledge Dumbledore had given them. No one rushed the defenses, which gave Avada a chance. With his Ji-Chi Tianya curse, he could bypass the stone wall and study the protective magic from behind, finding its weak points and making subtle preparations. That early reconnaissance, combined with the wizard's rapid learning, let Avada provide numerous small shortcuts. What would normally have taken over a week had been compressed into 5 intense days. The price was exhaustion. Once the stone was breached and the tension eased, the Hogwarts elite could barely stand. "Should we go in and take a look?" Rolf asked after a short rest, moving to the entrance and pointing down the tunnel. From outside, it still looked like a dark hole. The Horcrux chamber lay well beyond. "I'll pass," Percy said. "I need to write to Professor Dumbledore first and tell him we've broken through. Fawkes will be arriving soon, and I need to send word for him to take back." "Can it wait one more day?" someone asked, voice drained. "If we send the message now, Dumbledore will push us into the next stage, and I don't have the energy to lift a finger." Percy opened his mouth to protest, then checked himself and realized he felt the same. "Then tomorrow. We've moved fast enough." A hoarse cheer rippled through the cave. Everyone," Avada began, as if trying to make light of it. "Do you think—" Boom. Flames erupted, and Albus Dumbledore stepped out of them, eyes fixed on the hole melted through the stone. "Merlin's beard? This is incredible. You actually broke Lord Voldemort's magic so quickly. The power forged by your teamwork surpasses most professors." He was about to continue when he noticed the students' exhausted expressions. "Has something happened?" "Professor," Penelope asked, voice edged with despair, "how did you know the protective magic was broken?" "A small mechanism." Dumbledore pointed toward the dark opening. "I set one up behind the stone wall. When it detects the barrier's complete collapse, it sends me a message. Fawkes can bypass obstacles for me if I get that signal." Avada nodded silently. He had already found that device behind the wall. "So you were planning to rest a day before sending me word?" Dumbledore said, reading them. He could see the fatigue written all over their faces. "All right, breaking the magic in 5 days was a tremendous effort. Rest today, then tomorrow we continue." "Hooray!" Cheer again echoed, weak but genuine. Dumbledore rubbed his beard and smiled. "Since you're staying, I will tell you, verbally, what the second and final challenge will be. Do not worry, I'm only explaining it now. Inside this cave is a vast lake. What you need to study is on Heart Island in the center. You will have to devise a way to cross the lake reliably and long-term, whether by bridge, boats, or even by filling part of it." He grew serious. "Be extremely careful in your experiments. Hundreds of Inferi lie sleeping at the bottom. Disturbing the water could wake and enrage them." "Hundreds of Inferi." The 7 of them inhaled as one. "Yes." Dumbledore sighed. "It's Lord Voldemort's doing. He may have dug up graves and collected those bodies, or something more vile. We cannot be certain. I will, however, make the lake's existence known to the wizarding community after you finish the second stage to show the terrible consequences of extremist pureblood ideology and dark arts. For now, please be careful during your research and, if possible, avoid harming the Inferi. I will ensure they are dealt with respectfully when the time comes." "This is a placeholder. Attempting to fetch the chapter from ausclicklab.com/novel 53354. Hogwarts My Name is the Unforgivable Curse, chapter 242, failed. The server returned an empty chapter. If you can view the chapter on the website, try opening the URL directly and trying again. It's also possible that the novel isn't AI translated, so an AI translation may not be available. The news Professor Dumbledore brought silenced the cave. Hundreds, no thousands of Inferi. Reanimated corpses animated by dark magic. No life, no thought, no soul, obeying only their master, afraid of fire and light. That description wasn't the worst part. The real problem was the raw material, corpses. Corpses meant someone had been killed. Thousands of corpses meant a massacre. Avada let out a quiet, inward sigh. He should tell Dumbledore about the Horcruxes and borrow what he could for study. At worst, he could let Dumbledore keep the Resurrection Stone for a few days. There was no longer a curse on it, after all. The fragment in Harry worried him most. The technique to strip a soul fragment without harming the host was still primitive. How long would it take to deal with that? After the diary was recovered, he'd treated Horcruxes too casually. He needed to put more effort into them. "All right, get some rest as soon as you can, everyone," Dumbledore said softly. He sounded flattened for a moment, then smiled again. On the bright side, the lake waters should be much simpler to deal with than the stone wall was. I estimate you'll finish that work in at most 3 days. Since you've already exceeded my expectations once, perhaps even sooner. And once you've dealt with the lake, I'll gather people from across the wizarding world to handle the Inferi. That should take about a week to complete thoroughly. Only then will our experiment officially begin, so you'll need to remain at Hogwarts during that time. "What about after that, Professor?" Rolf asked, raising his hand. "When the experiment starts, will we live here, like we have these past few days?" "Haha, no," Dumbledore laughed. "Even the most obsessive scholar wouldn't spend every waking hour in a laboratory. You'll likely only need to come here 2 or 3 days a week as assistants. Of course, Fawkes and I will still be responsible for picking you up and dropping you off." "Only 2 or 3 days?" A few of them sounded disappointed, though none pretended they belonged among the very top minds who would run the experiments. They were talented, yes, but still students. They wouldn't understand most of what the work would entail. Assistant was generous. "All right, since the message is delivered, I won't disturb your rest." Dumbledore raised a hand. Fawkes fluttered onto his shoulder. "If anyone wants to see the lake, you may. Just don't disturb the Inferi. But I imagine you'd have no energy for that now. Good night." With a flash of fire, Dumbledore was gone. They slept until noon. When they emerged from their tents, Fawkes had already left the day's food in the center of the cave and gone off somewhere. "Whoa, good morning, or maybe good afternoon," Percy said, scratching his head. He had never slept so late since arriving at Hogwarts. "If there are no other questions, shall we begin the second stage?" Percy asked, and everyone nodded. Over the last few days, his habit of issuing practical orders had become automatic, as if etched into his nature. They followed the narrow tunnel that opened suddenly into a wide chamber, and then they saw it, a refurbished, brightly lit cave that looked more like a workshop than a dark wizard's lair. 6 of them, everyone except Avada, gasped in astonishment. Even Avada couldn't keep a few awkward sounds out. "Merlin above," someone breathed. "Professor Dumbledore must have set this up long ago." It lacked the expected gloom of a dark wizard's lair. Percy, hardened by years of being tormented by his twin, was the first to react. "Don't be careless," he warned. "There are thousands of Inferi hidden in the lake ahead. Don't touch the water before taking protective measures. Inferi on land are manageable, but remember, Professor Dumbledore asked us not to destroy them if we can avoid it." "Wait, everyone," Avada, ever the investigator, interrupted. "Come look. There's a faint trace of magic here." "Where?" someone asked. "Here. Yes, there it is. Good eye, Ken. It's hidden deep. Lucky you found it." Avada knelt to examine the air. "It shouldn't be hard to break. Penelope, could you start a small controlled fire nearby? I don't want to risk disturbing the Inferi." "Here and here. Got it." One of the students reached forward as if grasping something invisible. "Help me pull." "Already?" someone blurted. "Coming. Hold on." Under the combined effort, a thick, green-tinged copper chain rose from the lake like a living thing. It slid between their hands, coiled on the shore with ringing clanks, and, as if pulled by an unseen hand beneath the water, hauled something else up. Slowly, the bow of a small boat broke the surface, glowing the same sickly green as the chain, and drifted toward shore with hardly a ripple. "This must be how he crossed the lake," someone said. "Voldemort's little ferry?" "Tapping the hull. This is too simple," another murmured doubtfully. "Surely there's more to it." Percy was already studying the boat, frowning. "There is more. This craft doesn't seem ordinary at all." He paused, then added, "It appears to carry only a limited amount of mental energy." The others exchanged glances. The boat was not merely a physical vessel. Whatever enchantment animated it placed a restriction on mind power. Only so much could be transported at once. Using mental power as the standard for carrying capacity. Everyone who heard that line frowned. Why would Voldemort do that? If the standard is keyed to his own mind, this thing could carry almost any wizard. He's already at the top level. Maybe he was worried stronger wizards might sneak in? Rolf scratched his head. That doesn't make sense. If someone could far surpass Voldemort mentally, they'd probably be able to break all his traps. What's the point of that? So we mustn't let our guard down. There might be a deeper trap. You lot. Avada, who had been standing by as Voldemort's image filled everyone's minds, finally spoke. "Is it possible Voldemort set this up just for his own amusement? Remember the last checkpoint? We could have bypassed it with a little blood. That didn't seem like a very valuable obstacle." "Absolutely not." Percy shook his head. "Ken, I know you beat Voldemort once, so you might take him less seriously, but you didn't live through the era he created, when dark wizards ran rampant. That's not something you can dismiss based on personal fights. And don't forget, last year a single dark artifact left by Voldemort almost brought down the whole of Hogwarts. You can't presume to understand the Dark Lord's designs." They all nodded. Most of them were 17 or 18. The dark years were their childhood, and the shadow of Voldemort still lingered. Even though he'd been captured, Avada found himself at a loss for words. If he tried to argue, he'd have to mention the Horcrux. "In the end, I trust Professor Dumbledore's safety measures." He forced the sentence out. "Look, he's decorated the whole cave and still lets us students explore it, so the deadliest traps must have been neutralized. He only warned us not to destroy the Inferi. He didn't mention anything else." That's true. The line had the intended effect. They all trusted Dumbledore more than they feared the Dark Lord's leftover work. Percy drew a plan together. "Then we can research in two directions." He punched his palm. "Some of us will inspect the ship, test its maximum mental power capacity, and see if it moves automatically. The other group will study the properties of the lake water, see if it can be frozen or if a path can be created. I'll stay here and research the lake water. What about you?" "I'm with you," Penelope said at once. Then she added, "Or, actually, I'll go inspect the ship." Avada nodded agreement with Percy's plan too, but he had his own idea. He deliberately pointed out the ship. Otherwise, with Voldemort's concealment, they might not have found it so soon. If he could legitimately board Lake Heart Island early, he'd have a reason to tell Dumbledore about his accidental discovery in the most reasonable way, and try to get the real Slytherin locket as quickly as possible to eliminate that danger. Sirius was still entangled with Greyback, so it would take time to find RAB, Regulus Black, and Norberic University's progress needed speeding up. He needed to get Sirius out of the werewolf situation. Fortunately, the shielding device was nearly finished. There was no real need to mass-produce it. There were only a few dozen victims. A few professors working overtime would do. Avada rubbed his eyes. "Next year, I'll rest properly, teach a few classes, give a few lectures, maybe enjoy the Triwizard Tournament." He smiled at the thought. The mood lightened, and his work picked up. In a short while, he'd measured the ship's carrying capacity, and the result made his face change. "Okay, I've roughly gauged the ship's mental power capacity." He hesitated, then called to the others who were probing the lake in different ways. "This ship can hold all of us." Blank looks spread through the group. "Its mental capacity limit is huge." Avada shrugged. "I suspect that even if Professor Dumbledore sat on it, there'd still be room for one or two more. It looks like Voldemort was planning for his own power to increase. Fortunately, he was stopped in time. After a short silence, Percy said dryly, "But that doesn't help our mission. It's not us who need to board Lakeheart Island. It's a large group of the most powerful wizards in the world. I can try to modify the ship, see if I can remove the capacity limit and lengthen the hull to turn it into a bridge," Percy suggested. "That's good news." Penelope frowned. "This lake is nasty. The water won't freeze or solidify. Flying above it is forbidden, and extra matter can't appear on its surface. In you-know-whose design, that ship is probably the only way to cross." Rolf offered a plan. "We should try both directions. Try to break the lake's protective magic, and at the same time try to modify the ship. We don't yet know which is simpler." "Same thought," Percy nodded. "But if one route proves too hard, remember to give up in time. Professor Dumbledore said this part was simpler than the previous checkpoint. Then I'll keep working on modifying the ship." Avada found his chance. "But I'd also like to go to Lakeheart Island first and see if there are any other possibilities. Anyone want to come?" "Me." The question was answered by 6 voices at once. 245. Sudden summons. "Are you sure, Principal?" Late that night, in Principal Miranda Goshawk's office at Norbert University, Avada, using the alias Crew Impuri, looked across the desk at her in bafflement. "You mean I really don't have to take part in the upcoming operations? I won't complain about less work and an easier life. But isn't this exactly when the university needs manpower the most? The shielding devices have been distributed and the werewolf dens have all been located. They're just waiting on an order. Wolfsbane potion research and improvements are at a critical point. With social tensions exploding, there's bound to be unrest at Azkaban, so the best opportunity to infiltrate it is fast approaching. And up to now, my cooperation with Professor Belby and Professor Bell has gone smoothly. I haven't done anything to lose their trust, right?" He couldn't help sounding puzzled. Who wouldn't be? He'd been summoned to the principal's office late at night without warning, and the first thing she told him was that he didn't need to participate in any of the important operations anymore, said with a perfectly serious face. He'd done nothing wrong, had he? Over the past weeks, Avada's reputation had been slowly recovering. His classes weren't wildly popular, but they were praised. As a new professor, that was a decent start. His work with Bell and Belby had gone surprisingly well. They finished the shielding devices in 2 days, at lower cost and effort than expected, which had only improved his standing among the faculty. "It's not because of anything you did," Miranda finally answered. "You have more important things to do." More important things? Avada's confusion deepened. He'd been on the staff less than 2 weeks. How could he be assigned to anything more important than the tasks she'd just described? And in the current British magical climate, what could be more urgent than the werewolf crisis? "You need to go to Nurmengard." Goshawk nodded gravely. "Gellert Grindelwald wants to see you." "Grindelwald wants to see me?" Avada blinked. He tried to collect himself. Grindelwald, the man who once threw the magical world into chaos, who had instigated a second Great War, who had threatened wizarding secrecy and reshaped the balance between the two worlds. Dumbledore's old friend and mortal enemy wants to see him? An obscure, newly appointed professor? And Grindelwald was a prophet, too. Perhaps he already knew things that made this meeting sensible. Still, why him? "He didn't specify the exact reason," Goshawk said, as if reading his thoughts. "Only that he wants to meet you as soon as possible." "This is very unusual." Goshawk's expression softened into something like a smile. "In the 30-odd years since Norberic was founded, no more than 10 people have ever met our vice principal. Only 3 have been summoned to Nurmengard personally, the previous principal, myself, and now you." Avada managed a weak response. "It's an honor." He paused, then fired off questions. "When? How do I get there? Anything I should be careful about? Do we have a standard way of entering Nurmengard? The sooner the better. Tomorrow or the day after. We'll rearrange your classes so you don't need to worry about teaching." Goshawk nodded. "There's nothing particular to be careful about when speaking with Grindelwald. He was brilliant once and now holds an extraordinary position here, but he carries no heirs. People meet him so rarely simply because there's usually no need. As for a standard way in, there isn't one because there's no need for one." "No need?" Avada repeated, stunned. Goshawk explained. Nurmengard's only real security, beyond an anti-apparition jinx, heavy structural reinforcement, and concealment of its precise location, is non-existent. Avada didn't immediately take that in. Nurmengard, the prison that held the most dangerous criminal in the world, had no real defenses? It was true that Voldemort once penetrated Nurmengard, and that Grindelwald's own past escape had precipitated war across Europe, but still, a prison that holds someone like Grindelwald without defenses? It didn't make sense. You should remember, Goshawk continued, Nurmengard was built by Grindelwald himself to imprison his enemies during the war. Seeing his stunned expression, she smiled faintly. Think about it. Imprisoning an extremely powerful, dangerous, strategic wizard in a place he built himself, whose layout he knows intimately, and he's a prophet besides. Why do you suppose that was done? Because they never intended to rely on coercion to keep Grindelwald confined, Avada answered slowly as the pieces fell into place. For a wizard of his caliber, if he wanted to, no prison could hold him. If he chose certain methods, he'd be almost impossible to kill. You can't hold someone like that by force. Exactly. Grindelwald has remained in Nurmengard voluntarily for 50 years. And his followers? His allies? They tried to rescue him more than once, Goshawk said. He refused them every time. He knows leaving would be meaningless. His power, his ideology, his chance of rising again are gone. An escape would only stir social unrest, damage his dignity, and break the agreement that protects many things. It would hurt his old friend's heart all over again. So if you need to enter Nurmengard to meet Grindelwald, it's very simple. Find the location, fly over the outer wall, and then climb up to the high tower. That sounds a bit too careless, doesn't it? Avada still found it hard to believe. If it's that easy to get in, wouldn't they be worried someone might sneak into Nurmengard for some trivial or bizarre reason? And Grindelwald has so much advanced knowledge, someone might want to become his disciple or something. That's exactly why it's hidden, reinforced, and surrounded by very high walls, Goshawk said. All of that is meant to stop the kind of things you're imagining. She had the leisure to explain further. For us, it's one thing, but in the wider magical community, Nurmengard's location is one of the highest secrets. Only a handful of extremely specific posts are allowed to know it. Old Headmaster Norby Ridge only made contact with Grindelwald in secret after Grindelwald became Minister of Magic. Besides, Grindelwald's name casts a shadow over an entire era. Most people are simply too frightened to even think about him, much less go looking for him. You have a point. Goshawk didn't seem inclined to elaborate, so Avada pressed on. I still don't understand one thing. If you're only going to Nurmengard to meet Grindelwald, it shouldn't take that long. Even a complicated conversation would be a day or two at most. So why did you tell me not to take part in any of the upcoming plans? The implementation of those plans will be at least a week, maybe several months from now, Goshawk replied. There's no scheduling conflict with you going to see Grindelwald, is there? This is not as simple as you imagine. She shook her head. Grindelwald rarely meddles in university affairs. If he's asking for a meeting, it can only be because something extremely important is happening. And for him to request a meeting with you, someone he's never met, someone of no particular status in the school, well, that's significant. Don't forget, he's a prophet. You mean his conversation with me could change my destiny or assign me some kind of secret mission? You could look at it that way. All right, I understand. Avada nodded, indicating he had no more questions. So when would it be convenient for you to go to Nurmengard, not counting your class schedule? Goshawk stood and pushed her chair back. The sooner the better. Tomorrow. Tomorrow it is then, Goshawk agreed. Tomorrow. All right. After breakfast tomorrow, Professor Baker will take you to Nurmengard, Goshawk said. But I suggest you bring food and water. Time spent in the high tower can be unpredictable. After leaving Goshawk's office, Avada felt a little dazed. Fortunately, the matter at the Horcrux cave had been resolved ahead of schedule, so he could focus fully on Grindelwald without any nagging distractions. 2 days earlier, the 7 people in the Horcrux cave had finally devised a reliable way to reach Lake Heart Island. The key turned out to be unexpectedly mundane, the chain that pulled the boat ashore. The chain reached directly from the shore to Lake Heart Island, and because it was attached to the boat, It shared some of the boat's enchantments, among them the property that didn't disturb the inferi in the lake. Crucially, the chain didn't have any mental power capacity limit. In the end, the seven used the boat to pull one end of the chain to the island and constructed a stable, wide bridge along it, leaving the boat nearby for emergencies. The entire process took less than 2 days. Even Dumbledore was taken aback by their efficiency and the audacity of using that chain as a bridge. He'd thought the odds of finding the hidden boat were low and had never imagined that tactic. They were rewarded with a week or more of vacation to await the formal commencement of the experiment. Reports on the inferi were still being prepared and hadn't been published yet, but it was expected to break within a day or two. When it did, the magical community would likely be shocked by Lord Voldemort's atrocities, another development that would play into Dumbledore's and Norberic University's hands. But Avada wasn't in the mood to think about any of that. I'm going to Nurmengard to see Grindelwald tomorrow, he thought. Grindelwald. It struck him as ridiculous that he felt nervous. He saw Dumbledore, who had once been almost as powerful and perhaps stronger than Grindelwald, every day and sometimes joked with him. And the Grindelwald he was meeting this time wasn't even his physical body. Even if he turned this body to dust, it wouldn't matter. On the other hand, Grindelwald had aged, been imprisoned, and kept from practicing magic for 50 years. How much strength could he still have? More important, Grindelwald's true danger had never been raw power. Thankfully, Avada's mental strength had been improving. He could now stay awake for a day or two comfortably and could fall asleep quickly when needed. He no longer suffered the insomnia that had plagued him years ago. He slept well that night. Early the next morning, he found Professor Baker waiting in the dining hall. "Ready?" Baker asked. Avada had the odd sense that Baker was looking at him differently than usual. He could perceive the professor's thoughts. Indeed, Professor Baker's mind showed a tangled mix of emotions. If a student who once knew his secret had suddenly become powerful enough to converse with his superior, Baker's feelings would be complicated as well. "Ready, Professor? Then let's go." Baker led him to the great hall where Avada had first come to Norberic University. Standing before a dark wooden door, the professor produced a key. "This key has special permissions. It will take us to a location near Nurmengard through this door. Remember the place. It will make it easier to apparat there in the future. I have a feeling you won't be visiting Nurmengard only this once." He traced a few marks on the key, and when its sheen dimmed slightly, he slid it into the lock. With a gentle twist, the door opened. Outside was a dark, overgrown forest, patches of snow still unmelted on the ground. In the distance, a lone, massive tower loomed, vague and majestic against the sky. "No further," Professor Baker said, glancing toward the distant tower before turning back to Avada. "Any farther and you'll be inside Nurmengard's anti-apparition ward. You'll have to walk the rest of the way." Avada didn't answer at once. He seemed lost in thought. "Hey, Ken!" Professor Baker waved a hand in front of his face to rouse him. "Ah, sorry, Professor Baker. I was a bit distracted. What did you say?" "You have to walk the rest of the way yourself," Baker repeated, amusement in his voice at Avada's embarrassed expression. "Seriously, does just seeing a shadow of Nurmengard make you like this? Imagine meeting Grindelwald in person later. Relax a bit. No matter what scheming, ambitious person he was, or how powerful a dark wizard 50 years ago, now he's a retired university vice principal locked in a prison. He won't strike fear into you himself. What will is the subject he wants to talk about? You're only the third wizard in 50 years to ask a personal meeting with him since he was imprisoned. The principal told you that, right? The other two were our two previous principals." "Cough. Sorry," Avada stammered, more embarrassed than before. "It's just, how do I put it? The name Grindelwald feels heavy to me." He couldn't find the words. He'd never met Grindelwald in 14 years, but the man's shadow had loomed over his life. He had won Dumbledore's trust by echoing Grindelwald, handled the Chamber of Secrets crisis under Grindelwald's name, and his own philosophy echoed Grindelwald's. He had even recently joined an institution where Grindelwald had once served as vice principal. At Hogwarts, there were still students convinced he was Grindelwald's kin. "Any deep thoughts you've got, Tell them to Grindelwald to his face. Don't tremble a few kilometers away, Professor Baker said, patting him on the shoulder. Head straight back to the university after your meeting. Your key works within the anti-apparition ward. And remember, this is Austria, so if you plan to apparat here in future, pay attention to distance. I'm off. See you. With a small pop, he spun away and vanished, leaving Avada alone, staring at the distant tower. He shook his head hard, trying to clear his mind, then took his first step toward Nurmengard. As Miranda Goshawk had said, there were no active defensive enchantments around Nurmengard besides the basics. Avada probed with his magic. Aside from the anti-apparition ward and a muggle-repelling charm, there was nothing. No detection spells, no wards of aggression. He was certain 80% of his consciousness had already descended into this body, while his main body lay in bed back at the university under the pretense of catching up on sleep, so he could concentrate completely on meeting Grindelwald. Fortunately, it was the weekend, so he could afford to laze in his dormitory. After a long week of intense work, his classmates wouldn't disturb him. The tower itself had been magically reinforced. The stone was unnaturally hard, so much so that even a well-placed blasting curse would probably struggle to mar it. Those reinforcements dated back to when Grindelwald had built Newcomgard. The International Confederation of Wizards, who later took control, only did minor repairs. The place had become, paradoxically, Grindelwald's own prison. Avada didn't see a soul on his walk there. No guards, no staff. Who brought Grindelwald his meals? The question nagged at him as he reached the outer perimeter. A glossy, pitch-black circular wall rose at least 10 meters high with no visible door. It looked less like a gate than an assertion, constructed without real thought for anyone entering. There wasn't even an anti-flight charm on top. A broom could easily clear it. The design baffled him, but he'd seen stranger things. He crouched, pushed off the ground, and levitated up and over the wall, using a levitation charm he had developed himself. It had been intended for movement in interstitial spaces and was far slower than a decent broom, but today he pulled out the cumbersome spell anyway, partly to show off, partly because it felt appropriate. Once over the wall, he descended, found the tower's entrance, and climbed the winding staircase by hand. He wouldn't blithely float through the cell window and risk spoiling everything. The staircase was dark, narrow, and grimy. Through the dimness, he made out a row of candle sconces on the walls, caked with dust, clearly unused for decades. If Grindelwald had been confined here for 50 years, it seemed he had not stepped out of his cell by so much as a foot in all that time. After an indeterminate stretch of ascending, a battered wooden door appeared, light leaking through its seams. Avada felt a strange familiarity to the scene. Something about the arrangement echoed the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. He knocked lightly. Excuse me, is Mr. Gellert Grindelwald here?" Lowering his voice without meaning to, he added, "I'm Crew Impuri, professor of psychology at Norberich University. The principal said you wished to see me, so I came a little early. Come in. The door isn't locked." An old, hoarse voice came from within. Avada pushed the door open. With a protesting creak, the room filled with light, revealing a simple, tidy cell, and in the center of the backlit space, a slightly stooped figure. Then the voice, soft but unmistakable, spoke two words that sliced cleanly through the silence. "Good morning, Ken." 248. Broken Prophecy. Ken? Avada started for a moment, then let out a sigh of relief. This outcome was within his expectations, and it meant he no longer had to keep up a pretense. He could show himself to this dangerous wizard as he really was. He stepped as quietly as he could into Grindelwald's room and took a moment to take it in. The cell was much cleaner than the corridor had been, almost spotless. The furniture was spare, a table, a bed, and a partition that was probably the toilet. A large window filled the room with sunlight. It made him want to set a potted plant on the sill, but prisoners here clearly weren't allowed such comforts. Well, at least whoever lived here for 50 years didn't have it completely miserable. He reached instinctively for the door to close it. "Just leave it open," the old man mumbled. "Doesn't matter whether the door is shut or not. There isn't even a single mouse left here," he added. As Avada drew closer, he finally got a clear look at the old man. Gellert Grindelwald was gaunt and thin, his skin loose with wrinkles. His hair and beard were neatly kept, though Avada wondered how he managed to shave and trim them. In the cold March air, he wore only a coarse robe, yet his expression was calm, no sign of suffering. It was hard to reconcile this wizened figure with the elegant, terrifying dark wizard who had once raised Paris in Avada's memory. "Ah, Ken," Grindelwald said, peering at him. His mouth seemed to shape a smile, but the creases in his face made it unreadable. "You don't look surprised that I know who you are." "Sorry, Mr. Grindelwald." Avada's brow tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't remember very clearly. What do you mean by our previous interactions?" Grindelwald laughed, a sound like an old bell. "It's easy for you, yet you've caused me endless trouble. You want to know about our interactions? Then let's start with what you already know. First, Benjamin Baker, your first defense against the dark arts professor. I arranged for him to teach at Hogwarts. His main task there was to observe you." Avada's eyes widened. "He overdid that task. You breaking his Horcrux wasn't part of the plan, but the result was still correct. That diary should have been given to you then." You arranged for that?" Avada asked, dry. "Of course." Grindelwald rolled his eyes. "Even if Benjamin Baker was highly ranked, he wasn't high enough to hand out a university textbook on a whim. And another thing you should remember. Johnson Shaffy hinted to Lucius Malfoy that you had a connection to me. Guess who put that idea in his head?" Avada was speechless. He'd known Grindelwald had been a reliable seer, but he hadn't expected this degree of intervention. So much of what Avada had assumed were his own achievements had actually been set in motion by a dark wizard he'd never met. If Grindelwald could foresee so much, how had he ended up in that cell to begin with? Worse, why had he chosen such cruel, destructive paths? None of it made sense. For helping me solve the Chamber of Secrets?" Avada ventured. "Of course," Grindelwald replied as if it were obvious. "If not for that step, the Horcrux plan would have been more meticulous, covering every scenario he could imagine, including your prophetic ability. Without that clue, it would have been much harder for you to detect the truth. He would have been discovered by you, eventually, because he wanted to kill you, but by then, Hogwarts would have been on the verge of collapse." A cold fear settled over Avada. He had always been the one working behind the scenes, analyzing information and using his senses to craft solutions that led his enemies astray. He'd manipulated events to deal with Voldemort's diary, with Peter Pettigrew. Even Albus Dumbledore had been kept in the dark for a long while. And now he learned that some of his most important, far-reaching moves had been the result of someone else pulling the strings. Could prophetic power really be that terrifying? Avada had traveled through time, observed fate, even glimpsed souls, and paid a price to do it. Yet he had never grasped that prophecy could wield such influence. Professor Trelawney's prophecies had always seemed to reveal inevitabilities, not provide the detailed planning that could set such intricate traps. If Grindelwald had been so powerful, why had he lost to Dumbledore? Or rather, why had he chosen that cruel path at all? "Mr. Grindelwald," Avada said, staring into the old man's eyes, which were opaque with many emotions. "All these things you know, did you really prophesy them? Is prophecy truly that strong?" It wasn't at first. Grindelwald's expression grew strange at the question. "But thanks to you, it is now." "Me?" Avada blinked. "What does that have to do with me?" "This is what I want to tell you, the part of our interaction you don't know." Grindelwald walked past him and sat on the bed, staring out the window in a pose of reminiscence. "Even after all these years, I find it incredible when I think back. Very soon after I was imprisoned here, I learned my fate, to sit alone for over 50 years and then be killed by a noseless, bald man with a killing curse. I knew that the bald man would eventually die, trapped by Albus's scheme, and would never come to possess the wand I once used. I waited silently for that outcome." Grindelwald turned his gaze back to Avada. It was deep and complicated, and there was even a trace of fear in it. Until 14 years ago. That future shattered, because of your arrival. 249. Subverted Destiny. Because of my arrival? Avada frowned outwardly, but inwardly he understood. It was probably his fault, an outsider who barged into this world and tore the original destiny apart. "At first, I didn't realize it was you," he admitted. Grindelwald's voice was low. "At first, after the original prophecy shattered, I panicked. It felt as if I'd lost the power of prophecy. No matter how I tried to reconnect with time and fate, there was no feedback. After a while, I got used to it. I was already a prisoner who'd lost everything. What was there to fear in losing one more ability? I didn't even care much about losing my life. But then I noticed something else. I seemed able to communicate with destiny again, to make prophecies, but only fragments. Not my own visions alone. Every destiny was broken into pieces, so I could only see shards. That's when I realized something huge had happened. The entire world, at its deepest level, had been irrevocably altered. When I confirmed that, I nearly ran from my cell to find Albus, until another fragment of prophecy forced itself into my mind. Another fragment? Avada leaned forward. What did it show? Deathly Hallows. Grindelwald's smile was bitter. That name shouldn't be unfamiliar to you. Avada was silent, then simply nodded. I know it. The fragment I saw showed a child of about 10 in a rundown house carefully hiding a ring in a box, Grindelwald said. And even if that ring had been turned into a Horcrux or had been shattered, I would have recognized it. It was the Gaunt family's ancestral ring. It was also the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. That child was me. Avada pointed to himself. Exactly. At the time I realized I had, perhaps inadvertently, found the cause of destiny's shattering, or at least someone closely tied to it. Otherwise, how could a child so accurately find the Resurrection Stone, understand the existence of Horcrux magic and curses on it, and even have a box meant to seal dangerous objects in advance? So if we found that child, we'd be halfway to an answer. He had a wand, decent robes, knowledge of magic beyond his years, and even an expensive sealing box. He was connected to the magical community, not some stray muggle. That meant his whereabouts could be traced. Besides, the shattering of destiny had a silver lining. Although no one could produce a complete prophecy anymore, it had become easier to see fragments of possibilities. As vice principal of Norberrick University, I could use the school's intelligence network to gather information and compare it with the fragments I received. It was straightforward to pick the most plausible fragments and track their likely futures. So, I quickly learned your identity, particularly since our university has contacts in the Department of Mysteries. Wait, Avada was startled. Do you mean every prophet felt destiny shatter? Does that mean I was exposed to prophets worldwide? That's unlikely. Grindelwald shook his head. Prophets are exceptionally rare. There may not be more than 10 true seers in the whole world. If there were many, I wouldn't be the only one able to steer an era. Also, prophesying your existence required an existing connection to you. I was able to observe you because I'd been pursuing the Deathly Hallows in my youth. Others might not be so lucky. Don't worry too much. Keep it in mind as a precaution. Avada finally breathed a little easier, then followed up on Grindelwald's earlier point. So you sent Professor Benjamin to Hogwarts just to observe me? That was the plan, but things didn't go exactly as expected. Grindelwald nodded. Benjamin's instructions were simple. Observe you, uncover who you really are, and determine whether you posed a threat to the wizarding world. But Benjamin is one of the most exceptional students I've seen in 30 years. He overachieved with an almost reckless plan and brought me something important. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment a sharp, predatory glint cut through his cloudy gaze. You can see magic directly, can't you? Avada's pupils constricted, and the hairs on his arms rose. He had been mentally prepared for suspicion, but having this secret named so bluntly unnerved him. Fortunately, he had the means to protect himself now, so he no longer feared being torn apart at any moment. Don't worry, he said. I didn't tell anyone. I made Benjamin swear to keep it secret. Grindelwald seemed to notice the tension and tried to reassure him. You should still be prepared. With Albus's insight and the attention you've already drawn, he will inevitably have some suspicions. I know, Avada swallowed. He had almost told Dumbledore everything once, when he needed help protecting Harry and Baron. That confession had been partial, a calculated risk to get aid. Later, Dumbledore supposedly went to London, or perhaps left on his own to set a trap for Voldemort, which gave Avada room to maneuver and allowed him to pass himself off as an American adventurer. That probably didn't fool Dumbledore completely. The fact Dumbledore accepted Nicholas Flamel's alchemical notes spoke volumes. And you don't need to worry that I would use this against you, Grindelwald continued. From Benjamin's observations and what you did afterward, I judged you not a threat to the wizarding world. On the contrary, you are largely beneficial, and the risks you pose are manageable. That is why I wanted to meet you in person. Manageable? Those words caught Avada's attention. What does that mean? 2 and 50, Dumbledore and the Resurrection Stone. Power itself is a risk. Grindelwald snorted. The wizarding world isn't like Muggle society. An individual wizard's strength matters. It shapes influence. A single powerful wizard can overturn the whole magical order. I and that bald man who was supposed to kill me are both examples of that. And the consequence is the great unpredictability of power. If one powerful wizard turns evil, he can bring catastrophe to all of magical society. Even wizards who start out good and upright have blind spots, biases that, if exploited, can cause enormous harm. Your headmaster is a perfect example. Which headmaster? Avada asked. Albus Dumbledore. Grindelwald said the name reluctantly, then grew serious again. When I say the risk you pose is controllable, I mean your power and potential are not unlimited. You might become the most powerful wizard in history, perhaps, but your power won't exceed the bounds any wizard can reach. When I first learned you had shattered the world's destiny, I worried. You understand what I feared. An absolute, eternal, unrestrained being appearing and ruling everything, the world operating only by his will, whether he chose good or evil. You should know how terrible that would be. I shouldn't be able to do that. Avada felt oddly flattered. Grindelwald's expectations of him were higher than he'd realized. And Grindelwald was right. Avada hadn't transcended wizardly limits. He was unusual in 2 ways: his magical senses and the information carried in his past life memories. Neither fundamentally elevated him. In vitality, mental strength, or soul structure, he was like other wizards. At best, he could optimize himself slightly with his heightened senses. He could never surpass human constraints. As for prophetic power, less to say, the original story had already been broken by his interference, and his memories could only supply hidden information at best. Grindelwald had told him the world's fate had already been rent, and Avada had confirmed this while exploring time. Even with his athletic talent optimizing to the limit, it was doubtful he could defeat Dumbledore with the Elder Wand. Dominating the world? I know you can't, he said. Grindelwald smiled faintly. Otherwise, I'd have found a way to kill you back in your first year. For some reason, when Grindelwald said it, Avada felt no threat, as if the remark was as natural as breathing. Grindelwald truly was the strategist who once shook all of Europe. Avada decided to drop the awkward topic. Mr. Grindelwald, why did you call me here? It can't be just to tell me this, right? Oh, how easily I forgot the main point. Grindelwald stroked his beard and clapped his hands. Actually, it's simple. 2 things. First, when you reveal the Horcrux to Albus, do not show him the Resurrection Stone, and do not tell him anything about it. Why not? Avada asked, puzzled. Years had passed. Dumbledore should have moved beyond his youthful obsession with the Deathly Hallows. He knew in his bones that the Resurrection Stone couldn't truly bring his family back. In canon, what Dumbledore did in his final year was defeat Voldemort, not search for ways to prolong life or resurrect his sister. With Voldemort gone and the pureblood quarrels pressing, Avada judged Dumbledore unlikely to lose himself now. You don't understand Albus's obsession with the Resurrection Stone, Grindelwald answered, as if reading his thoughts. You may know he once had a sister. She was caught in the crossfire and died in a battle between me, him, and his brother. That was the clearest cause of our falling out. I know. Avada thought but said nothing. His ability to gain Dumbledore's trust had owed much to Ariana. At the mention of her, Grindelwald's expression darkened briefly before he recovered. Albus has always been tormented by that. Worse, he could never be certain whose magic struck his sister in that chaotic fight. In other words, there's a 1 in 3 chance she died by his own hand. Because of that, he's obsessively fixated on her death. Believe me, if you let him glimpse any possibility of resurrecting the dead, he will pursue it at all costs, even risking his life. Avada nodded. In the original story, wasn't Dumbledore deceived by the Resurrection Stone? So even I can't predict how he'll react if he sees it, Grindelwald continued, and you've known him less than 4 years. it's even harder for you. And the resurrection stone is one of the deathly hallows, something Albus chased in his youth. I don't know if he still believes the absurd legend that collecting all three hallows lets one master death. If he does, then his reaction to the stone will be even more unpredictable. That reminded Avada he'd forgotten the setting that mastering the hallows might grant control over death. He had once considered trying, then abandoned the idea because he wasn't confident he could beat Dumbledore yet. Now he saw how easily the legend could light Dumbledore's obsession. He'd been thoughtless. "I understand," he said. "I'm planning to confess the Horcrux to him in the next few days. I'll keep the resurrection stone hidden, for now. What I want to ask is, when I'm ready to deal with all the Horcruxes, can I show him the stone? You might not know, one Horcrux is much harder to handle than the others. I intend to use a confession effect between soul fragments to force it out of the vessel, and that ritual might require Dumbledore's help." "When would that be?" Grindelwald asked. "In a year or two." "That's fine." Grindelwald nodded. "By then you should have the ability to slip away from Albus, and destroying Horcruxes is such a grave matter that he should be able to keep his wits about him. After that, judge for yourself. By then you'll understand the situation far better than I do now. And the second thing I want to say—" "Wait, Mr. Grindelwald," Avada interrupted, curiosity getting the better of him. "You said earlier you don't believe the legend that collecting the Deathly Hallows lets one master death. Do you really dismiss it?" Grindelwald sneered. "Legend?" He couldn't hide his contempt. "That's at most a bedtime story." 251. The Secret of the Elder Wand. When I was young, a fragment of a prophecy suddenly entered my mind, revealing the existence of the Deathly Hallows and telling me how extraordinary they were. From then on, I poured all my effort into following every clue I could find about those three artifacts, tracing them through countless historical records and ruins. For that, I didn't even care about being expelled from Durmstrang. If anything, I thought it gave me more time. Before I left school, I even painted a Deathly Hallows symbol on a wall. Thinking back, it was youthful recklessness. "Excuse me, Mr. Grindelwald?" "Ahem, I've wandered off," Grindelwald said, pulling himself out of his reverie. "After I left school, I spent years traveling the world looking for traces of the Hallows. Combining what I had learned at Durmstrang with what I found on my travels, I reached a conclusion that was close to the truth. The Hallows are the Elder Wand, the Invisibility Cloak, and the Resurrection Stone. The wand had spawned many legends in the wizarding world, but the other two were unheard of. They were deeply tied to the Gaunt family, one of the pure-blood lines, and their creators were very likely the Peverell brothers. Most importantly, at the time I was sure that if I could gather the three Hallows, I would possess the power to master death." "But that's not right, is it?" Avada cut in. He could tell the conversation was heading toward the painful matters at Godric's Hollow and didn't want it to go there. "What made you change your mind?" Grindelwald sniffed, a little annoyed. "You probably know what happened, so I won't dwell. The thing that changed my view was a study by Norberic University." "About the soul?" Avada thought of the book Professor Baker had given him and asked. "Precisely. More precisely, it was about the Elder Wand." Grindelwald did not deny it. "The study began while Norby Ridge was still alive. He often sought me out for information, especially memories of using the Elder Wand. I'll admit Norby Ridge was brilliant. Had he been born 20 years earlier and allied with me, Albus might not have prevailed, though knowing his character, he would never have been drawn to me then. At that time, the university had already begun hunting dark wizards worldwide. The captives they brought in were worse than I am, often devoid of any humanity. Don't look at me like that. I know the number of deaths directly or indirectly caused by me is probably far greater than those caused by those I studied, and I don't intend to defend myself. Back then, I truly believed I was doing something great, something that could save the world." "For the greater good?" "For the greater good," Grindelwald agreed without hesitation, apparently oblivious to any oddity in Avada's voice. "But there's no point lingering on that now. If there's nothing else, I'll return to the Hallows." He waved his hand and his tone quickened. "Where was I? Right. Norberic University was short on manpower and magical strength for hunting dark wizards, so they launched a study to uncover the secret of the Elder Wand, and if possible, mass-produce that secret for distribution to every professor. During their research, they came to a startling conclusion. The secret of the wand was related to the soul. They had amassed a great deal of data on the soul from the dark wizards in their custody, and those captives could be used as test subjects without moral hesitation. After a long study that poured nearly all the university's resources into it, they reached a more precise conclusion. The power of the Elder Wand comes from love. Avada blinked, wondering if he'd misheard. Comes from what? Grindelwald chuckled at Avada's expression. When Norby Ridge told me, my face was exactly the same, but perhaps another way of putting it will help. Its principle is to simulate love. Simulate love? Avada was incredulous. How could a wand, an object fought over in bloody succession, have anything to do with love? Yes, simulate love, Grindelwald repeated. You know how love carries an odd, powerful force, sometimes even called miraculous. The Department of Mysteries studies it. Albus raves about it too. Norberich University was the first to identify the fundamental reason love is so special. It is the only emotion that originates from the soul. An emotion originates from the soul? Avada felt his assumptions overturn. He had always understood emotions as changes in mental power, physiological and mental states. The soul was a person's true self, not an active source of emotions. Pay attention to my wording, only, Grindelwald emphasized. Love is fundamentally different from other emotions. It is the only known feeling the soul itself can emit. In other words, generating love means mobilizing the power of the soul. Magic fueled by the soul is vastly more powerful than magic driven by ordinary mental power. If you master the techniques, it can produce effects people would call miracles. The Elder Wand has the ability to influence its owner's soul, allowing them to tap into a degree of soul power without actually producing the emotion of love. That's how it amplifies magic so dramatically. 252. What is mastering death? Influencing souls. Avada muttered to himself. The idea fit perfectly with everything he'd learned about the Resurrection Stone and his observations of the invisibility cloak. Indeed, the three Deathly Hallows were the Peverell brothers' masterpieces in the field of soul magic. Whether it was the protective charm Lily Potter cast before she died, or Salazar Slytherin's method of hiding the Chamber of Secrets, both pointed to the Hallows' intimate connection with the soul. It was almost certain. The Gaunt family, heirs of Slytherin, and the Potters, Harry's ancestors, were descendants of the Peverells. And conveniently, members of those families had produced soul-related magic and guarded one of the Hallows each. Dumbledore had already confirmed that Lily's protection used the power of love. If, as Grindelwald had suggested, love could mobilize the power of the soul, then that charm was a form of soul magic. No wonder Avada had been completely unaware of it when he first visited the Dursleys. The more he thought about it, the more curious he grew. What sort of wizards were the Peverells to have explored such a mysterious field over 1,000 years ago and created marvels like the Deathly Hallows? Grindelwald's narration interrupted his thoughts. Even after decoding the basic principle of the Elder Wand, Norberich University's attempt to replicate it failed. The realm of the soul is too deep. Knowing the principle doesn't make it easy to deduce the exact methods of implementation, and the wand isn't in the university's hands anymore. Borrowing it for study is nearly impossible. So that project was shelved. Now that you know this, and you already have the Resurrection Stone, what do you think? Grindelwald asked, his eyes on Avada with keen interest. After a moment's thought, Avada offered his conjecture. I believe the true purpose of the Resurrection Stone isn't to resurrect the dead, but to generate souls. He stopped himself at the word create, recalling the immense, majestic, soul-like orb of light he had seen when he dived into the timeline. Generate souls? That's an interesting idea. Grindelwald understood instantly and smiled. Have you tried making the Resurrection Stone produce pure impersonal souls? I have. It worked. Then that's it. Grindelwald's face lit up with a joy that made him look years younger, a resemblance to Dumbledore's cheerful air. All this time we underestimated the Deathly Hallows and the Peverell brothers. He laughed loudly. Albus and I, Merlin's beard, we were fools back then. No, perhaps I was the bigger fool. Avada couldn't help but chuckle. Grindelwald went on, nearly giddy. Guess what else I intended to use the resurrection stone for, besides mastering death, when I first learned what it could do? I wanted to build an army of Inferi, a hollow that can generate souls, yet I thought to use it to make Inferi. How ridiculous. He laughed until he had to lean over the bed, gasping like a bellows. When his breath settled, his expression grew serious. Norberich had many speculations about the resurrection stone. We all agreed it couldn't truly bring the dead back, at least not in the sense we think. Your information nearly confirms the most startling theory. If it's true, then the Peverells might be the greatest wizards in history. What exactly is that theory? Avada asked impatiently. The teasing had gone on long enough. Grindelwald exhaled deeply. That the Hollows were intended to guide wizards in exploring the realm of the soul. The resurrection stone can produce soulless raw materials, letting scholars study the origins of the self without harming others. The Elder Wand can influence the soul, simulating the emotions that arise within it, and the invisibility cloak. He paused, voice hoarse. According to the prophecy's interpretation, if I'm not mistaken, the true function of the cloak is to block deathly power. Block deathly power? Avada's heart skipped. Deathly power, an unknown force that manifests the moment a soul loses the protection of mental power and draws that soul out of the world, was observable but impenetrable, a kind of scythe of death. Could the cloak really block it? Grindelwald didn't bother to explain deathly power. Avada already knew. Think about it, he said. The impersonal souls produced by the resurrection stone allow you to probe the soul's nature and structure. The Elder Wand's ability to influence the soul lets you study the power generated by personal souls and how a soul's force functions within magic. And the cloak gives a breakthrough into studying deathly power itself. The soul, the interaction between soul and magic, and deathly power that reclaims souls, almost every mystery about the soul can be placed under those three headings. His voice brimmed with admiration. The Hallows were meant to lead wizards to explore the soul. That is the true meaning of mastering death. It does not mean that someone who collects the three Hallows becomes immortal and can toy with souls at will. Rather, the truth revealed when the three are gathered will allow wizards collectively to properly control souls and master death. It would usher in an unimaginable era. He changed tone, cold and indifferent. Of course, this hypothesis stands only if the cloak indeed blocks deathly power, and that's something you'll have to confirm. You know where the invisibility cloak is, don't you? He let the question hang, waiting for Avada's reply. 253. Simulating the confession effect? You should also know where the invisibility cloak is, right? It's hard not to know. Grindelwald admitted it matter-of-factly. It's at Hogwarts, in the hands of the boy who was prophesied to defeat the Dark Lord. From that I discovered the Potters are another line descended from the Peverells. Once I learned that, I couldn't just take the cloak for research. I still had to give Professor Dumbledore his due. I originally intended to entrust it to a member of the Shafiq family, he continued. But Benjamin has already brought you into all this, and you seem quite interested in souls and the Deathly Hallows. You also have a good relationship with Harry Potter, so I figured you wouldn't mind studying the cloak while you're at Hogwarts. I'll try, Avada said. He wouldn't deny he was intensely curious whether the cloak could truly block whatever the narrative called deathly power. Grindelwald nodded. Anyway, you can perceive magic directly, and you've got the resurrection stone in your possession, so studying it should be straightforward. If Norberich University tried this, it would be a long, costly effort. They managed to deduce the true ability of the old wand without even having it, so this small matter should be nothing for them. Old wand. Wait. The thought struck Avada suddenly, and he blurted out the question that had sprung to mind. Mr. Grindelwald, do you know about the confession effect? Confession? Grindelwald looked surprised. Of course I know. I also know what you're getting at. You mean that confession as an emotion can affect the soul, allowing fragmented pieces to reunite? Avada nodded. But don't you think confession is actually a form of love? Grindelwald considered that for a moment and answered slowly. A person without love can't truly confess from the heart. Mere regret over missed opportunities that would have benefited oneself isn't confession. The prerequisite for confession is a sincere recognition that one's past actions were sinful, that in harming the victim, one has also tormented one's own soul. So confession can reflect great love for ideals like peace and justice, or self-love as an attempt to soothe one's own conscience. Why confession can repair souls torn by deathly power, and whether other forms of love can do the same, remains to be proven by further research. The idea made Avada giddy. He barely listened to the long explanation, and an unrelated question tumbled out of him. If the power of love can be simulated with magical objects, could confession be simulated too? Simulating confession? Grindelwald raised an eyebrow at the audacity of the question, but replied earnestly. Theoretically, yes. The old wand set a precedent for mobilizing soul power through external objects. Confession is essentially a way of using soul power, so there's no reason it couldn't be simulated in a similar fashion. Why do you ask? Has your soul been fragmented and needs repair? Grindelwald probed. No. Relief flooded Avada at the negative answer from Grindelwald, though he tamped it down, forcing his voice steady even as it trembled slightly. My soul is fine, but if the power of confession could be simulated externally, could it be used to retrieve a soul fragment from a Horcrux without destroying the Horcrux itself? That question had haunted him for years. He had longed for a way to remove soul pieces from precious objects without demolishing them. To his astonishment, the answer might lie so near, hidden in Dumbledore's old wand. That's a very interesting idea. Grindelwald thought it over, then looked up with a rare light in his eyes. You want to use it to strip soul fragments from the Resurrection Stone? I assumed you'd stop pursuing that after sealing the Dark Lord. After all, he's the first in history to split his soul so many times. I don't know that I'd have the patience to collect so many Horcruxes myself. Not just the Resurrection Stone. Avada drew a breath to steady himself. Voldemort turned many extremely valuable artifacts into Horcruxes, and I don't want those treasures destroyed just to extract a fragment. He spoke casually, but beneath that calm was something far more urgent. This possibility could finally solve Harry Potter's problem. Avada had always known of only two ways to affect the soul, the elusive confession effect and the arcane, crude magic of Horcrux creation, splitting a soul and hiding it in an object. Voldemort had sealed part of his soul by that method, and Avada's research had focused on it for a long time. But Horcrux magic, compared to deeper soul magic, was primitive. It could only do so much. Even extracting fragments from artifacts had been a grueling struggle. Dealing with Harry's situation, two souls coexisting for over a decade, had seemed nearly impossible. Now someone was saying the confession effect could be simulated, and the key might be Dumbledore's old wand, which the man could examine at any time. How could he not be elated? Mr. Grindelwald, Avada said, excitement and nerves tangling his voice. May I tell Professor Dumbledore about this? I need to get the secrets inside the old wand, Grindelwald replied seriously. It's too important. You might not appreciate how persistent the forces behind Voldemort are. As long as he isn't utterly finished, they won't rest. Ah, those pure-blood families? Avada suggested. Grindelwald snorted. When I had power, after dealing with the Muggles, they would have been first on the list. All right, you can discuss the Deathly Hallows and Souls with Albus. Invent a plausible reason. Don't expose your connection to me just for this. And Albus probably already has his own guesses about the old wand, but without the facilities of a proper university, it's hard for him to proceed. He shouldn't make things difficult for you. 254. Opportunities for universities to emerge. I know. Avada nodded vigorously. If he didn't have to keep one eye on Grindelwald standing in front of him, his true body would already have flown into Dumbledore's office. And I remember, Albus has been researching soul-related issues recently, hasn't he? Grindelwald fixed him with a half-smile. Bringing him that news at a time like this, that was a bold move. Avada blinked innocently. Didn't Grindelwald start the conversation about the Deathly Hallows? Seeing Avada's face, Grindelwald shook his head with a quiet chuckle. We've talked about the Hallows enough. Don't forget I called you here for something far more important. More important? What is it? Avada's heart skipped. Grindelwald's first matter had sounded like a simple reminder not to tell Dumbledore about the Resurrection Stone, but he'd used that subject to reveal a lot about the Hallows, information Avada could hardly ignore. Some details were within reach, even things Avada urgently needed. If this wasn't guided by prophecy, he couldn't believe it. What could be more significant than that? The time for Norberich University to make its public debut to the wizarding world is approaching. Grindelwald's opening sentence sent a jolt through Avada. An official unveiling of Norberich University meant that resistance from the pureblood families had been largely neutralized. Controls on knowledge would be relaxed, and the structure of the magical community would enter a new phase. This was imminent? But Avada saw no signs of it at all. The pureblood families had not been crushed. The ministry still tightly controlled information, and outside Britain, the International Confederation of Wizards remained a potential obstacle. Grindelwald continued, and I can sense that the opportunity for the university's public opening is closely connected to something you did. His expression grew serious. Norberich was the heir to Grindelwald's ideals, the last living embodiment of his obsession. His concern for its fate rivaled that of his rule over the wizarding world. This vision entered my mind last November, and it was one of the reasons I sought you out. Think carefully. What did you do then? November last year, probably around Halloween, Avada searched his memory for anything he might have missed, and then realized. Peter Pettigrew. Last Halloween, when Sirius Black infiltrated Hogwarts, Avada had taken the chance to alter Pettigrew's memories, turning him into a hidden bomb placed within the pureblood families. If any single action of his could tilt the balance of the whole game, this would be it. He had regretted it at the time, but now he had to accept its consequences. He also knew Sirius had become a complication among the werewolves, and the werewolves were likely tied to the pureblood families. It seems you remembered. Grindelwald watched him closely. You don't need to tell me the whole story. What matters is that what you did last November significantly accelerated the Norberich plan. If I'm not mistaken, the university's public opening will be next year. Next year? Avada was stunned. Could altering Pettigrew really have set in motion the collapse of the pureblood faction within a year? And next year, wouldn't that coincide with the Triwizard Tournament? If Norberich went public then, would it also enter champions? That would be audacious. What exactly happened, Mr. Grindelwald? He asked. I don't know. Grindelwald met his gaze. This is a vast matter. The information involved is complex. Had fate not splintered the way it has, this event might have qualified as a true prophecy, like the one that the divination professor under Albus once made. With my power alone, I can't sift through the nearly infinite shards of possibility to find the most likely course of events. That's why I called you. Miranda told me not to participate in any of the university's operations and to hand my classes over, right? Avada said. Yes. Avada hesitated. Do you need me to do something time-consuming? I'm still at Hogwarts. No, nothing that will drain you. Grindelwald dismissed the worry. Take a portion of time each day. For the coming period, I need you to come to Nurmengard every day and use your talent for sensing magic to observe my mind magic. I will extend my prophetic sight as far as I can, and you will help me process and analyze the fragments of possibility that appear. Working together, we can double the efficiency and find the future most favorable to the university's plan. Avada blinked. You may not need to be that elaborate, Mr. Grindelwald. A little embarrassed, he interrupted. I can directly observe the whole timeline through your mind magic. Like Professor Trelawney's, Grindelwald's mental radiance contained a thread into the magical world that led into strange realms. Avada could follow that thread, as he had in his third year, to re-enter fragmented timelines and examine possible outcomes at will. He had stopped after taking a severe hit to his mind once. That brute force kind of divination was inefficient, and that mysterious sphere of light might return at any time and hurt him again. But combined with Grindelwald's controlled prophetic gifts and the intelligence resources of Norberich University, the method could be different, far more precise and far less dangerous. Hogwarts, Headmaster Dumbledore's office. Dear Sirius, it's good to hear from you again. To be honest, after confirming that the magical seal on the letter paper was indeed from your hand and showed no tampering, I breathed a small sigh of relief. Even knowing that you're not afraid of being bitten or of facing those savage werewolves in combat, the forces that empower them remain dangerously unpredictable. Your report exceeded my expectations. I assumed that being able to control the werewolves involved in the crimes while capturing Fenrir Greyback would already be a consummate achievement, but you have given us far more. The clues and conjectures you provided are invaluable and corroborate intelligence Pettigrew has recently returned. If everything proceeds as we hope, we may soon be able to put our greatest enemy to rest. Do not worry about the aftermath of dealing with those werewolves. Remus has spoken to me. He plans to resign his post at the end of the term and re-enter the wizarding world as a werewolf, to fight for his people's rights and to mediate conflict where he can. I fear this places far too much responsibility on him. Once these matters become public, hostility toward werewolves will likely spike beyond what we can imagine, and extreme incidents may follow. Yet Remus voluntarily steps into the eye of that storm, and presently the help he can gather is small. There is some hope. A former Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, Benjamin Baker, recently reached out to me and introduced me to Damocles Belby, a leading scholar on lycanthropy. Mr. Belby is close to a breakthrough that should make the Wolfsbane potion easier and cheaper to produce. If that happens, it could significantly ease the tensions. On a lighter note, Harry's curiosity about his mysterious godfather has reached amusing lengths. Ever since Christmas, when he received your gift and letter, he's been trying to learn more about you. He allowed Argus to give him detention just so he could search archive records from more than 10 years ago in Argus's office, which, naturally, extended his detention by another week under Minerva's supervision. From what I've seen, he may be closer to the truth than he realizes. Perhaps you two should meet sooner rather than later. Knock, knock, knock. Dumbledore set his quill down and looked toward the door. It was the weekend. Who would be calling now? The gargoyle at the entrance announced the visitor. Mr. Ken. Dumbledore's curiosity rose. If this particular student came at such a time and with such urgency, it usually meant something serious. Do come in, he said. The door opened and Avada Ken stepped inside. His face was grim, more so than when the governors drove Dumbledore from his post last year, which made the headmaster bridle with concern. Professor? Avada drew a long breath, then, with a kind of resolve, dug into his pocket and produced a few small objects. He thrust them toward Dumbledore, as if afraid he might change his mind. Please, look at these. The sudden alacrity seemed to relieve him. He set the items on Dumbledore's desk and pushed them forward, an exquisitely worked golden cup and an ornate, tarnished diadem. They looked old enough to have been unearthed rather than made. Dumbledore blinked. Hufflepuff's golden cup and Ravenclaw's diadem? The magic on them doesn't seem counterfeit. Are these really relics of the founders? Where did you find them? Wait, no, there's something else here, he added, leaning closer. He did not wait for an answer. Dumbledore reached for his wand and passed it over the artifacts, sending out a careful, probing charm to sense their enchantments. Avada's face lit up. This was a chance to study the old wand's workings, and he had shut down his Grindelwald-side clone just to come and observe it properly. Dumbledore's expression shifted from puzzlement to shock. This is a Horcrux? These are Lord Voldemort's other two Horcruxes. How did you find them? Or have they been in your possession all along? Avada's eyes hardened. They've been with me for a year, Professor. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I suspected them even earlier, before the diary opened the Chamber of Secrets. You know about my old prophecy, the way I used to see things. Of course I do, Dumbledore said, though his attention kept flicking back to the relics. After a long moment, he asked, Can you tell me where they were hidden? Yes, Avada nodded. Ravenclaw's diadem was hidden in Hogwarts, in that room that changes itself according to the user's need, the room of requirement. You mean the hidden room not far from my office? Dumbledore exhaled. So one of Voldemort's Horcruxes and a Founder's relic have been right under my nose all these years. Good heavens. And the cup? The golden cup was in a dilapidated house, Avada said, and altered his tone to a practiced casualness. In a place called Great Hangleton. desolate, almost uninhabited. The cup was wrapped in protective enchantments. It took a lot of effort to recover it. He offered the explanation without elaboration. Dumbledore, naturally, could not be allowed to know certain things yet. No mention of the Resurrection Stone, or how a student had slipped into Gringotts' most secure vault. Avada had to craft a plausible story, however clumsily. Besides, considering the diary and the basin of green potion from the Chamber of Secrets, Voldemort's protections around his Horcruxes had not been as infallible as one might expect. 256. The evil solution to the green potion. The rundown old house in Great Hangleton, perhaps it's connected to the Gaunt family? Dumbledore mused, then nodded. That is very likely one of Lord Voldemort's Horcrux sites. He liked to hide his Horcruxes where his own history was rooted. The Horcrux cave by the sea you explored earlier was a place he found in his childhood at the orphanage. However, Mr. Ken, may I ask? Dumbledore paused, studying the two artifacts before him. He still seemed unable to accept fully that two priceless relics of the Founders, twisted into Horcruxes, were sitting in front of him. After a long look, he turned back to Avada Ken. You obtained these two Horcruxes over a year ago. How did you handle them during that time? And why tell me about them only now? Avada's pupils narrowed. Dumbledore had hit the nail on the head. For more than a year, he said, steadying his breath, I've been trying to find a way to separate the soul fragments from these objects without damaging them. They are far too precious to be ruined just because Lord Voldemort defiled them. I also wasn't sure whether you might choose to destroy them immediately upon seeing them, so I kept them to myself. I'm sorry. Ha ha, then you underestimated me, Mr. Ken, Dumbledore laughed. Do you really think I would casually destroy relics left by the Founders, objects of such magical and historical value, just to remove a few soul fragments? Only in the most desperate circumstances would I consider such a thing. If I were dying, and Voldemort had returned and was decimating wizarding society, even the diary from last year remains intact with me. And speaking of last year, I accomplished something else recently. His voice took on a note of pride. By measuring the soul content in the diary, in the crystal, and in Voldemort's main soul, I've been able to estimate how incomplete his soul is. From those measurements, I can roughly infer how many Horcruxes he made. The number should be 5 to 7. With the 2 you've brought us, we now account for 3, including the diary, and another one is currently being investigated, under that basin of green potion in the cave you deciphered. If I'm not mistaken, you suspected this already, didn't you? Is there really a Horcrux there? Avada pretended surprise. When I learned the cave was linked to Voldemort, I suspected it, but during the exploration I dismissed the idea. I didn't expect it to be true. Voldemort was careless in setting defenses for his Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. Those spells are powerful, sophisticated, durable, yet they can be bypassed almost as if they were trivial. That suggests splitting his soul damaged his judgment. He must have been confused and muddled when he set up those protections. Avada nodded in agreement. That matches my impression. The defenses felt less designed to keep outsiders out and more like traps for someone under his command if he came to inspect the Horcrux. Dumbledore smoothed away the serious look. But we've strayed from the question. I still want to know why you chose now to tell me about these 2. It's because of the basin of potion in the cave, Professor. Avada grew serious. After Percy and I finished building the bridge to Lake Heart Island, we used the remaining time to study the potions there. We reached some preliminary conclusions. Given your interest in exploring the soul through those potions, we formed a tentative hypothesis. You think those potions must be drunk by a living being with a soul to be activated? Avada smiled slightly. With their level as students, it would have taken days of research to reach even a hint of that conclusion, but his prompting had forced them along faster. I'm glad you understood. Drinking by a living being with a soul is indeed the simplest way Voldemort designed to clear that obstacle. Almost any other conventional magical method won't affect that basin. This also means the basin holds secrets about the soul itself, which is why you wanted the world's leading wizards to study them. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance to investigate the soul. Avada picked up Helga Hufflepuff's golden cup from the table and held it in both hands. Which brings me to why I told you now. I may have found a way to move those potions and get directly to the Horcrux beneath them, using this golden cup. Dumbledore's eyes brightened as he understood. This golden cup contains a fragment of Voldemort's soul, he said. Avada looked at the cup with an odd mix of pride and amazement. Yes, on a whim I tried the idea, and to my surprise it worked. In a sense, it's like a living thing with a soul, similar to the diary we confiscated last year, and it's shaped like a cup. The crucial point is that Helga Hufflepuff herself enchanted her cup to hold far more contents than its size would suggest, so it can carry food and drink with ease. That enchantment gives it almost boundless internal capacity. Mr. Ken, before Avada could finish, Dumbledore interrupted, urgency finally breaking through his usual composure. Are you free to come with me right now? Of course, Professor. Excellent. You've been tremendously helpful, Mr. Ken. Fawkes. Dumbledore gathered Hufflepuff's cup and Ravenclaw's diadem, tucking them into his robes, then offered his hand to Avada. We're going to the Horcrux cave immediately. Boom! The fiery light that had filled their vision vanished, and Avada and Dumbledore were once again standing in the Horcrux cave left by Lord Voldemort. Dumbledore had not yet opened the cave to reporters. Those in fairy horror images had not hit the front page of the Daily Prophet, though he had leaked that he had seized another damning piece of evidence against Voldemort, and that reporters would be admitted in the coming days. He was planning something much bigger. In a few days, leading wizards from around the world would gather at his invitation. But those plans were changing. Hufflepuff's golden cup had provided a new way to deal with the potion without consuming it, essentially allowing Voldemort, in theory, to hold the potion in his mouth and then spit it out. Using the cup, Dumbledore could transfer the basin of potion intact to a properly equipped laboratory for study, instead of having to refit the cave. That pragmatism, however, made much of the 7 students' earlier hard work feel wasted. The visiting dignitaries would no longer need to pass through the passages the students had cleared, and whatever faint good impression they might have earned that way had been lost. Please hand Hufflepuff's cup to me, and stay put, Mr. Ken. Dumbledore stepped in front of Avada, his tone suddenly grave. We cannot be sure this basin is the final trap. If Voldemort was clever, he might have left another hidden trick inside, hoping to catch intruders who've been lulled by the simpler defenses. All right, Professor. Avada hadn't considered that. After all, Voldemort hadn't seemed that subtle. Who would have imagined a plan where the drinker would grab the Horcrux and then be dragged into the water by Inferi only after his accomplice carried the object off? Dumbledore handed the cup back to Avada and turned to his phoenix. Fawkes, you stay here with Ken, he said. If anything goes wrong, take Ken straight back to Hogwarts and then come find me. Ken, step back a little. The last obstruction is often the most frantic and destructive. Under Fawkes's steady gaze, Avada retreated to the cave entrance. Dumbledore raised his old wand and began layering protection charms. After the first unusually thorough set, he added several more, each one nearly indestructible. Then, carefully, he crossed the little bridge he had helped build and stood before the stone basin. He levitated Hufflepuff's cup with his wand and lowered it toward the green potion. The rim of the golden cup touched the potion and made soft ripples. Dumbledore paused, watching closely. When he was satisfied the cup would not be damaged, he guided it down until it sank, and the potion began to pour in. The cup kept filling, and the visible depth of the basin seemed to vanish. The green liquid poured continuously, the basin's level visibly falling. Dumbledore eased back and added yet another ring of protections. His caution was rewarded. As the liquid drained, a gleam of gold gradually appeared at the bottom of the basin and slowly revealed its true shape. When the last of the potion had been drawn into the cup, the object seemed to release whatever seal had bound it. It could now be moved freely. You may come over now, Mr. Ken. Dumbledore studied the object with a blank, incredulous look for a moment, then glanced at the cup, suspended and full of green liquid by his magic, before turning to call to Avada. There are no additional traps. It's safe. Avada crossed the bridge to the island in the lake and used his magical senses to examine Hufflepuff's cup. It confirmed what he had suspected. The potion had not utterly corrupted the soul fragment, nor destroyed the Horcrux magic it protected. Moreover, because Voldemort had not endowed the cup with consciousness or mobility, it had not suffered the kind of agonizing reaction that a sentient object might have. There would be no struggle to complicate matters. "You've helped me a great deal, Mr. Ken." Dumbledore's look was deep and sincere. "You've advanced Voldemort's demise by a significant step. I judged this Horcrux one of the most difficult to handle. As long as his soul hung on, his followers could be given ideas, adding dangerous variables. Now I can breathe more easily. And the laboratory conditions can be greatly improved," Avada said, hinting that the cave would not need to be modified after all. He also glanced at the golden object at the basin's bottom with curiosity. "What is it, Professor?" Dumbledore examined it, a shadow crossing his face. "If I'm not mistaken, this is Salazar Slytherin's relic, the famed Slytherin locket. Voldemort has defiled it as well." "That's not entirely surprising," he went on. "He sought out relics of the Hogwarts founders to turn into Horcruxes. As a descendant of Slytherin, that locket would have been one of the easiest to obtain. Fortunately, Godric Gryffindor's relic was not touched. Gryffindor left only one commemorative item, and it has remained safely at Hogwarts." He gave a faint, rueful smile. "Of course, that item has been hidden within the Sorting Hat." Avada gave an almost inaudible half-smile, the corner of his mouth twitching as he thought the Sorting Hat's protections more useful than any sword. Then he looked back at the locket with renewed interest. "Can we try to open it, Professor?" Chapter 255. After Avada's request, Dumbledore first waved his wand, checking for any deadly enchantments on the locket. Then his face grew puzzled. "This Horcrux, there's no trace of magic on it at all." "No, not just no ordinary magic. There's no trace of Horcrux magic either." He made the locket float, pulled Avada back a few steps, and began tracing slow, intricate patterns in the air with his wand, while murmuring complex incantations. Streams of spectral light issued from the old wand and washed over the locket, seeping in like water into paper, then drawing back, bringing glimmers of information into the wand. It was clearly a very deep and difficult detection spell. Avada's attention, however, was not on the spell or the locket. No detection charm was as incisive as a skilled practitioner's magical senses, and he had known the locket was a fake from the start. He was using the moment to study the Elder Wand and Dumbledore's soul. Norberich University's conjecture is correct, he thought. In only a moment, he reached a conclusion. The old wand was somehow influencing Dumbledore's soul, causing the two to cooperate and draw on power together. How extraordinary. Someone had actually applied the mysteries of the soul in practice 1,000 years ago, back when wands were new and the wizarding world hadn't yet taken firm shape. Norberich University were impressive. They had deduced the secret of the Elder Wand from records and from analyzing Grindelwald's feelings, even without the actual object. If they had obtained the wand, would they not have tried to mass-produce it? A power that could change the whole magical society. In their presence, the Death Eaters, the Order of the Phoenix, even the Wizard Party all felt inadequate. While Avada watched and thought, Dumbledore finished his analysis of the locket. There isn't a single trace of magic. It's completely ordinary. How is that possible? He took the locket and opened it. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment. "To the Dark Lord," he read, pushing his half-moon spectacles up as he unfolded the paper. His brow tightened as he read softly. "I know that by the time you read this letter, I will already be dead. But I want you to know, it was I who discovered your secret. I have taken the real Horcrux, and I will destroy it as soon as I can. I accepted death so that when you face your destined opponent, you will be nothing but a mortal of flesh and blood. R.A.B. We've encountered the most unexpected complication," Dumbledore said, displeasure in his voice. "Someone got there first." "From the tone of the letter," Avada said, frowning. "The person who took the Horcrux clearly knew Lord Voldemort, at least enough that Voldemort would recognize the initials. He's probably one of the Death Eaters. And he was learned, trusted by Voldemort, able to discover the cave's secret through clandestine investigation, and able to deduce that those potions had to be drunk." Dumbledore followed the line of thought. "Most likely someone from one of the pure-blood families with a long inheritance of such knowledge and a natural rapport with Voldemort, a surname beginning with B, Black, Burke, Bulstrode, perhaps. R.A.B. Wait here a moment. He turned to Avada, uttered a quick word, then took Fawkes and vanished in flame. Before Avada could react, Dumbledore was back, carrying the large stone basin from his office. "You brought the Pensieve?" Avada asked, puzzled. "I must go through my memories," Dumbledore replied. If R.A.B. is from a pure-blood family and a Death Eater, he was almost certainly a student at Hogwarts and would have left an impression on me. Avada understood immediately. Even Voldemort had been a student of Dumbledore's. By searching Dumbledore's memories for pure-blood students with initials R.A.B., who later became Death Eaters, they might rapidly narrow the field, perhaps even find the culprit at once. Dumbledore plunged into the Pensieve. He sifted through years of recollection, and then he stopped, trembling. "I've gone through all these years of memories, and only one person fits every condition," he said, looking up. "Regulus Arcturus Black, of the House of Black, a Slytherin. He displayed pure-blood supremacist tendencies and an early admiration for Voldemort when he first enrolled, and he was confirmed to have joined the Death Eaters at 16. Let's go, Mr. Ken." He paused, as if unsure whether he had spoken to Avada or to himself. He called Fawkes, extended a hand to Avada, and added, "There's no point in staying here any longer." Avada said nothing and took Dumbledore's arm. They vanished in a flash of flame and returned to the headmaster's office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ken," Dumbledore said as the fire died away. "I need to keep Hufflepuff's cup for a while to transfer the potions inside. It will likely take a few days. As compensation, I intend to give you this." He waved and a black diary appeared out of thin air, floating to Avada. "Don't worry, Tom Riddle's consciousness in that diary has been completely suppressed by me. You may examine it freely. I also hope you will pursue a way to destroy Horcruxes without damaging the objects themselves. I believe you can do it." After a few more words about contingencies, Avada noticed the urgency hidden beneath Dumbledore's calm and took his leave. Dumbledore watched him go, then sat back down, dispelled the half-written letter with a vanishing charm, and drew a fresh sheet of parchment. One day later, Sirius Black sat once more in Dumbledore's office. He looked the part of a scandal-ridden nobleman returned to decorum, dark hair, handsome but weary, dressed in old-fashioned expensive clothes that made him resemble a pure-blood heir. He held a piece of parchment in trembling fingers, his jaw was tight, his knuckles pale. Normally, he would be dealing with the fallout from the werewolf attack, working with the Order and the Aurors to round up Greyback's escaped followers. But Dumbledore's urgent letter had brought him straight back to Hogwarts. "What are you thinking, Sirius?" Dumbledore asked, watching him. Sirius was silent so long that Dumbledore had to draw him back from his thoughts. He finally spoke, voice raw. "I think you're right. It is Regulus, my brother." "You may not know," Dumbledore said quietly, "but even then, there were rumors in your family that he didn't die at the hands of an Auror, that he was killed on Voldemort's orders or by one of his followers. From what I learned, he sank very deep into Voldemort's circle, and then he was afraid of what they would make him do, so he wanted out. He could not simply hand in a resignation. It was either serve Voldemort or face death." Sirius's voice broke. I never thought he would be so." "Brave," Dumbledore finished for him and handed him a cup of tea. Sirius drank it in one gulp. At the time, he admired Voldemort more than anyone. "I always thought him a fool." "Professor," Sirius said, steadying himself, "you said the potion by the lake causes dreadful thirst, makes you want to drink the water, and then the Inferi drag you under. If that's true, it's likely he's at the bottom of that lake now, isn't he?" "Either him," Dumbledore answered, "or his companion." Dumbledore's tone was careful. "If Regulus is in the lake because he drank the potion himself, then he may have done so deliberately to allow his companion to take the real Horcrux and get away. If, on the other hand, it is his companion lying in the water, and Regulus died at Voldemort's hands as your family believed, then Voldemort would have reclaimed the Horcrux before Regulus died. In that case, all of Regulus's efforts would have been in vain. He would have suffered greatly." Sirius's breath caught. After a long silence, he said, voice low, "I want to see." Dumbledore looked at him and then nodded. "Very well." They apparated to the island on the Black Lake, to the Horcrux cave itself. Dumbledore muttered to himself as he surveyed the place. His students' meddling had complicated matters, but then drew his wand and set to work. The lake's surface, already held by Voldemort's enchantments, shivered under his magic. Ripples became waves, waves became whirlpools. The water boiled as if under a fierce wind, and the Inferi inside were forced to the surface, bobbing and helpless. Something in the deep cracked, as if an invisible seal had broken. The lake's magic relaxed. The water went from rock-steady to an ordinary, livelier pond. "Good," Dumbledore said. "Easier than I thought. Sirius, be ready." All at once, the water rose as if breathed up by the wand. The lake water condensed into chains that bound each Inferius and hauled them out in a neat row. The bodies, preserved in ghastly solidity, were still recognizably faces even after years under the water. Sirius stared, eyes wide. Then, with a sudden, trembling cry, he pointed. "It's him. No one else. It's Regulus." Dumbledore steered the one Sirius to the ground in front of him. The Inferius lunged and snarled uselessly at an imagined foe, but the water chains held it fast. Dumbledore then touched the body with his wand. Black, oily mist poured from the creature's mouth and nostrils. Its livid, waterlogged skin began to settle and warm. Moments later, the ghastly mask of an Inferius faded, and lying before Sirius was a man in a sodden robe who looked merely asleep. Sirius dropped to his knees without thinking and took Regulus's hand, clutching it as if it could carry life back into him. He bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered to Dumbledore, voice broken. After a long while, he rose again, eyes raw. "I'm sorry, I lost my composure." He looked toward the other bodies, then back at Dumbledore with hard, sudden resolution. "And I think I know who Regulus's companion must have been. It could only have been Creature, a house elf utterly obedient to his orders, trusted with something that important. He would be at Grimmauld Place." "We have to find him," Sirius said. "We have to go now. Are you ready?" Inside Grindelwald's cell in Nurmengard Tower, Gellert Grindelwald and Imply, who was being controlled by Avada, sat facing each other. Avada still held his wand. Through his magical senses, he could see Grindelwald's vivid golden mental energy boiling and slowly spinning along the thread that linked him to the deeper currents of magic, gathering power. Even in the closed room, Grindelwald's robes rustled as if stirred by an invisible wind, the sign that he was about to use his prophetic gift. There was no doubt, Grindelwald was a true master of prophecy. His peak was at least on par with Professor Trelawney's genuine prophecies, and even his lowest moments were far more reliable than hers. Grindelwald could wield his talent, whereas Trelawney's was mostly passively triggered. "Ready, Mr. Grindelwald," Avada said. "Let's begin," Grindelwald replied. Wait a moment." Avada's face went sheepish, and he scratched his head under Grindelwald's impatient glare. "Professor Dumbledore is calling me." "Hurry up," Grindelwald urged, grunting. Avada nodded and shifted his attention to his main body at Hogwarts. A crimson feather, accompanied by a flash of fire, had appeared in his hand. Fawkes's feather. He frowned. To use Fawkes's power to send a message directly, whatever this is must be urgent. He smoothed his robes and, as he always did when receiving a phoenix message, enclosed the feather in his palm and waited for the familiar warmth to surge through him. A flash of fire filled his vision. When it cleared, Albus Dumbledore's lined face looked back at him, grimmer than usual. "Professor," Avada acknowledged, falling silent and waiting for instructions. "The potion in the golden cup has been recovered," Dumbledore said first, taking the now empty Hufflepuff cup from a drawer and setting it on the table. "You can have it back, but there's something else I want to give you." Dumbledore reached into his pocket and placed another golden object on the desk, the Slytherin locket. "The real Horcrux." "This is the real Horcrux?" Avada whispered, surprised. He could see the soul fragment trapped inside, the Horcrux enchantment around it, and an extra chain-like binding on the outermost layer that tightly suppressed the fragment's activity. That binding was the very charm he had devised 2 years earlier, an experiment using properties from a dragon egg, specifically to deal with Voldemort. "You found it so quickly?" he asked. Dumbledore's expression was not pleased despite the success. Regulus Black paid the ultimate price to get this Horcrux. He drank the potion himself so his companion could carry the locket away and hide it. "I knew that companion." He paused. "It was a house elf. For over 10 years he lived within reach of people I could access. He guarded the Horcrux all that time, and he tried in every way he could to destroy it, as Regulus had wished. You were able to get the house elf to hand it over? I found his new master, also a friend of mine, Dumbledore said. By then he was desperate. He'd tried for years without being able to harm the Horcrux. We promised to deal with it right away, and he willingly turned it over. We also retrieved Regulus's body. That little elf is probably still mourning by his master's grave. Avada let out a relieved sigh. The bitter story of Regulus and Creature had a more complete ending than in the original accounts. If Sirius ever saw this, he would witness his brother's sacrifice and Creature's loyalty, and it could finally mend some long-standing misunderstandings. Once Sirius cleared his name, Regulus Black might at last be remembered as a hero throughout the wizarding world. Now, Mr. Ken, Dumbledore said, pushing the locket toward him, I should like to entrust this Horcrux to your safekeeping. I have suppressed the soul fragment, so it's safe to transport and store. You said you were searching for a way to remove soul fragments alone, Dumbledore continued. I have confidence you can do it. Avada accepted the locket without surprise. Dumbledore nodded approvingly, but added, We must not celebrate too soon. This is not the last Horcrux. My readings indicate part of Voldemort's soul is still unaccounted for. Those missing pieces could form one or two more Horcruxes. We still have work to do.